Welcome to Bloomerang Academy. Welcome to Bloomerang Academy. Thank you so much for joining us today, where we are talking about practical tips for your fiscal year end. So for many of you, this is your fiscal year end and the start of a new fiscal year. That means you need to make sure that you don't lose any of those donors you took such pains to acquire last year. It also means tying up loose ends to assure you don't leave money on the table. So for those of you who are on a different fiscal year, it's never too early to think about what you need to do down the road or to get your reports in place for when you need them. So today we're going to be talking about some reports. We'll take a look at some Livewind, pledge reminder, and downgrade reports. We'll also take a look at some fiscal year-end donor retention action strategies and some practical tips. We'll take a look at some quick cleanup tips as well. This is something we recommend year-round, but especially around your fiscal year end/beginning. We'll take a look at some resources and Q&A as well. So first thing that you're going to want to do is, if you haven't already, update your fiscal year settings in your organization settings. If you are administrator in the database, you can go into your settings and update this. And this is important to do because this reflects in two major areas in your database. First, all of the metrics that you see, or most of the metrics that you see in your dashboard, when it says fiscal year, it references the fiscal year in your settings. The second is when you run your reports, you can filter your reports by date, and you can select calendar year or fiscal year, and the fiscal year references what's in your organization settings as well. So you want to make sure those are up to date. So if you are an administrator in your database, you can go to settings and then my organization. And if you look at the fiscal year start here, this is where you would input the fiscal year start date. You don't have to put the end date. The system is smart enough to figure out what the start date is, or what the end date is based on the start date. So you only have to put in your start date. This automatically defaults to calendar year. So if your fiscal year starts on or coincides with the calendar year, you don't need to do anything with this. But if it's other than the calendar year, so if your fiscal year does not start on January 1st, go ahead and go into your settings and update that. Next, we'll talk about some reports, and we have some report templates that are already been built into the database for you that you can customize. What I love about these report templates is that it gives you a starting point of there's already some preloaded filters and columns in there that gives you a starting point that you can customize to fit your needs. And we'll take a look at those. Well, I'll show you where to see the different report templates that we have. We're not going to go through all the report templates today, but specifically we'll take a look at your Livewind, pledge details, pledge reminders, and downgrades. As I mentioned, you want to customize the template to help you decide what your next steps are. I personally like adding columns, for example, for lifetime revenue or number of gifts and engagement level. And all of this helps me to determine what my thresholds are, who am I going to call, who am I going to send an email to, what help do I need, and all of that information helps me do that. So let's jump into Bloomerang and take a look at our report templates. So anyone can go into our reports. When you go to the report list, all of the reports in your database, whether or not they were created by you or someone else in your organization, will appear in your report list. So if you save any of our report templates that we make today, it's also going to appear on this list. The nice thing about that too is once you already customize that report template, you can just make a copy of that every year or adjust the date filters every year. For today, we're going to start with a report template. So we're going to click Start from a Report Template. If you haven't visited this area yet, I recommend going in here and seeing what's available. We are only talking about a handful of reports today, but go ahead and go in there and see what other things might be useful for you. So the first thing that we'll take a look at is our Livewind report. So these are constituents who gave last fiscal year, but not this fiscal year. Our Sidewind report is very similar. These are constituents who gave at some point in the past, but haven't yet this fiscal year. So we'll open that up. And there's a couple of things I want to point out here. First, let's take a look at this filter. You can see that it's referencing revenue amount is at least 1 cent. What does this filter mean? Revenue amount takes a look at your revenue type transactions. So these are actual dollars received. That's going to be your donations, pledge payments, and recurring donation payments. It doesn't factor in the pledge. It doesn't factor in soft credits or the recurring donation schedule. And we have the amount set to 1 cent because we know that most of you for your in-kind donations would have a $0 amount and have the amount under the full or in-kind fair market value. Another thing I wanted to point out is you have several date options here. So right now it's defaulting to last fiscal year. And again, it looks at your fiscal year based on your organization settings. You can always click on this and see what your different options are. You can take a look at it by month, by quarter. You can see here last fiscal year, this fiscal year, next fiscal year. The difference between last fiscal year and last year is last fiscal year is based on your settings. Last year is based on calendar year. So we'll cancel out of that. Now, I did mention here that this report takes a look at revenue transactions, donations, pledge payments, recurring donation payments. One of the ways you want to customize this is think about why you're running your Livewind report. Most of the times it's going to be so you can re-engage your donors who are lapsing, about to lapse, or who have lapsed. And you want to take a look at that. So a question to maybe ask yourself in your organization is, what are the things that factor into those, into your retention? For example, for your organization, would you want to include, let's say, soft credits? Let's say someone who is raising a lot of dollars for your organization, so they're getting a lot of soft credits, but they don't have a lot of donations on their timeline. Would you want to consider them in your Livewind or not? So that's another thing to take a look at. If so, what you can do is we can take out the filter for revenue amount because soft credit is not a revenue transaction. So we'll take that out. And instead, we'll take a look at type. So again, when you type in your filters here, you're going to see a lot of different filters. What you want here is just type. And with this, you can specify what actual types of donations you want to be included in your report. For example, if you want donation, pledge payment, recurring donation payment, so those are your actual dollars received, plus your soft credit, you can add that. I also want to point out here, what's the difference between pledges and pledge payments, and why are we not adding both? So pledges counts the commitment or the total commitment or the total dollars committed. It doesn't necessarily mean that the amount has already been paid. The pledge payments actually counts those payments that have come in. So if someone made a $1,000 pledge to your organization and they've made $500 toward that pledge, the pledge would count $1,000. The pledge payment would count the $500. So another decision point here is to think about, what does retention mean for you? Do you want to take a look at pledges, or do you want to take a look at pledge payments? We don't recommend adding both, because what that can do if you add both is it could inflate your totals, because it's going to add the $1,000 for the pledge plus the $500 for the pledge payment. So you're inflating your totals. So typically you want to select one or the other. So in my case, for example, if I want actual dollars received plus the soft credits, I'm going to add that in. And again, to get rid of that, the in-kind donations, I can go in there and say that it's only for donations up to $0.01 and up. Now, I'm going to cancel out of this. I would just want to show you the filters that you can add, but I'm going to cancel out of this. And just as a reminder, this is a very similar filter in your exclude. So whatever changes you make in your include, you want to mirror the changes in your exclude so that everything is consistent. And you'll want to do that with the columns that you have in your report as well. Maybe you might be filtering for revenue up here. You want to make sure that your columns are also showing you revenue. If you're filtering for raise up here and revenue up here, you might get into some confusing scenarios where the numbers don't match. Check if your filters and your columns are consistent. Another thing that I want to point out here is this is set to household giving. This is important because it takes a look at the overall household, not just the individuals. So for example, if I have gifts in my database under my name, and my husband has gifts in the database under his name, instead of looking at us individually, it's going to take a look at our household giving. Because you don't want to send a reminder or a reminder to the household if they've already given just under a different name or just under a different individual within that household. So you want to make sure that you're running the report to household. Now, this doesn't mean that if the constituent is not in a household, they're not going to be in a report. What this does is if the constituents are in a household, it takes a look at their household giving. If they're not, or if they're an organization, it takes a look at their individual or organization giving. So no worries there. The next thing I want to point out here is the columns. So we have columns here for the name, the latest transaction date, the latest transaction amount, last fiscal year total, and fiscal year interactions. So already this is giving me some information here. If Alexander Hamilton gave last fiscal year but hasn't given yet this fiscal year, and I haven't interacted with him at all this fiscal year, maybe that's a little bit telling. Maybe that's why he hasn't given again. Or if you take a look at the latest transaction date, perhaps because our fiscal year just switched over, you might have some constituents there who maybe just gave last month, but since we're in a new fiscal year, it's already counting them in this report. So those are some considerations to take a look at. I do love adding some additional columns as well. For example, one of the columns I like adding is engagement level. Engagement level is going to show me if a constituent is cold, cool, warm, hot, and on fire. Perhaps there may be constituents here like Peter Venkman who might be cool because maybe this is just their first time gift, or maybe they haven't interacted with our organization in other ways. You can tell that. Or maybe you might find someone who is on fire, even though Peter Parker here is only given, and I say only with air quotes, $100. Maybe they engage with our organization in a different way, or maybe they're a longtime supporter of our organization. So it just gives you that much more information. Another thing I like to add here is the number of gifts. So if I wanted to add the number of gifts, I would go to Has Transactions, and I have the option to show the number of transactions. Now, when I first add this filter, it's going to default to all transactions. That's not necessarily what I want. I want to mirror what the filters are showing and what I'm telling the report to show me. So you can always go in here, go to specific transactions. This report is specifically taking a look at revenue transactions. So we'll say, show me their number of revenue transactions. And I can compare, I can take a look at, for example, Stark Industries here has had 261 gifts with my organization. I didn't filter by date, but I can compare that with, okay, they've had 261 transactions with my organization. Last year, they gave this much. Another column I like to add is their lifetime giving. So again, decision point here. Do you want to take a look at raised or revenue? You want to make that consistent. So I, in this case, want to take a look at lifetime revenue. That just gives me a bigger picture overall of the constituent and helps me make those decisions. So the decisions I'm looking to make here are, I have 121 households. What is my bandwidth and what is my appetite for engaging these donors who have given last year, but not yet this fiscal year? Maybe I want to sort my report, for example, by date, because again, we have constituents here who last gave in 2021, and we have constituents who last gave this year, but again, since we're in a new fiscal year, they're being counted already. So that's one threshold I can take a look at of, okay, maybe I want to call constituents who haven't given since, let's say, 9 to 12 months ago. If they gave last month and today is a new fiscal year, maybe we don't give them a call yet. Maybe I also want to layer in their lifetime revenue. Perhaps if I have a higher value donor that has given more in their lifetime, perhaps that warrants a phone call rather than an email or a letter. Perhaps I want to give everyone a phone call. It just depends on what your capacity, your organization's capacity and appetite is to re-engage those donors who gave last year, but unfortunately not this year. So that's one of the reports that we recommend running. Your Livewind report is going to be very similar to this. Actually, before we navigate away, let's go ahead and just save that. So I'm just going to save that in my Livewind. And typically when I save the report, I'll just add what year it is as well. So let's take a look at our Livewind real quick to see how that differs. If you go to your Livewind here, we haven't specified the date range yet. So this just means they have given at some point in the past. If you want to customize this and put a date range, you can absolutely do that. For example, maybe you want to take a look at constituents who have given in the last 5 years, but not this fiscal year. Perhaps you want to take a look at last 3 years, but not fiscal year. I always start, I like to start with a wide net and narrowing down the field. So again, it helps me determine those thresholds. Seeing the numbers helps me determine those thresholds of what our bandwidth and our appetite is. Now, once I'm going to hop back into our Livewind. So once we've saved the report, there's a couple of things you can do here. Of course, we've saved it. So one, if I need to reference this report in another report or a letter or an email, I can absolutely do that. Two, I can also schedule this report to go out to certain people at a certain schedule. For example, if this was something I needed to keep an eye on every month, every quarter, whatever the frequency is, you can so every week, every month, or daily, you can absolutely do that. You can even select if a Bloomerang login is required to view the report. So if you have board members, for example, or volunteers who don't necessarily have a user account in your database, you can still send this report to their inbox. Just add their email addresses here. So when you click in this field, it's automatically going to pull in users who are in your database, but you can add email addresses for those who aren't in your database. Enter your subject line, and for the content, we recommend adding the action that you want to do. So for example, if this is going to be your call list, go ahead and add the columns for your call information as well, and put that in the content. Hey, this is our list of Livewind for this month. Can you give these folks a call? Or if you have your strategy of like the first 5 this person's going to call, the next 5 this person's going to call, put as much detail as you can in the content. This is going to populate into the body of the email when the recipients get the email, and the report is going to be attached as an Excel file. You also have this option here where if there are no results for that month, I'm saying month because that's our selected frequency, then the report is not going to be sent out. Once you select your frequency, you also want to select which day of the month it is and what time it gets sent out. And of course, click Save and Schedule. We're not going to go do that today, so I'm going to go ahead and cancel out of that. Now, again, I wanted to review a big part of why we're talking about this is your donor retention. Our average donor retention rates are, as of 2021, nonprofits on average, it's 43.6%. However, if you break that down further, for first-time donors, it's 19.3% versus a 59.6% for your repeat donors. So if you think of it from this lens, you maybe also want to take a look at or layer in there. Take a look at who were your first-time donors last fiscal year. How can you get them to their second gift this fiscal year so that you can up your donor retention rate for your first-time donors? And you know that once you've been able to get them to give again, there's a higher likelihood that they'll become longer time supporters of your organization. And I mentioned earlier that we are big advocates of personal touch. We talked about setting thresholds and what your bandwidth and what your appetite is for that personal communication or any communication, but really personal communication is key. We took a look at our Bloomerang data, so these are actual Bloomerang customers, and what their percent change in revenue is based on the recorded interactions. For those that made a phone call, they received a 17.73% increase in revenue versus those that didn't make a phone call, they actually saw a reduction in revenue. You can see here as well for personal emails, those that sent out personal emails increased their revenue by 9.86%. Those who sent text messages increased it by 10.202%. In-person interactions, and we're counting virtual as in-person as well, 17.44%. So you'll see the highest yields here are your in-person interactions or phone calls, followed by text messages, followed by your personal emails. So really, it seems that the more personal the communication, the higher your yield is in terms of revenue. So personal communication or those relationships leads to higher revenue. So with that, the first thing that we want to take a look at is prioritize customers you want to give a phone call to. Call your most important lapsed donors. So this can be those who've given the most, as well as those you believe have the greatest potential to renew. I know we all have limited time and resources, so who you call and how many donors you call will depend on your own resources and the makeup of your donor database. So begin with those who've given the most, as well as those you believe have the greatest potential to renew. That could be based on their affiliation with your organization. So that could be they have a high engagement level, which could mean that they've been a loyal donor for a period of years. Maybe they're a current board or committee member. Maybe they're a volunteer. Maybe they're a vocal advocate of your organization. Start there. Another thing we like to do is called first-time donors who've made an above average first-time gift. If you don't know what your average first-time gift is, you can run a report in Bloomerang of first-time donors and average out what that amount is. So you can get a gauge of what's an above average gift for your organization. Research shows, like we saw earlier, only about 19% of new donors give again, but if you can get them to make a second gift, you almost triple the chances that they're going to renew. You also want to take a look at those who've given consistently over a period of years. These are your most likely future planned giving donors, the ones who might leave you a bequest. You don't want to lose these folks, so find out why they may not have yet renewed, so you can get that conversation started again. Again, we all know that a lot of you are 1 or 2 person shops who are wearing multiple hats, and you may not have enough resources or folks to help to make those phone calls. You can organize this as a live or virtual phone-a-thon, perhaps, and enlist your board members or other volunteers to help. Take a look at how much money you might otherwise leave on the table, and you'll see the merit of such a strategy. One thing I've seen this done really well, especially for a school organization, is to have students make the phone calls. Having the donors hear directly from constituents who benefit from their donations goes a long way in getting them engaged with your organization, getting the relationship or building that stronger relationship, and giving to your organization again. Another thing that you can do is you can send a "We miss you" letter or email to your lapsed donors that you can't call. Again, depending on how big your list is, you might decide, and what your resources are, you might decide this is our threshold that we can call. That doesn't mean that you can't do anything for the others. So consider a "We miss you" letter or email, especially for those that you were not able to reach. Make it brief, direct, and as personal as you can manage. For example, if you called someone and left them a message, reference the fact that sorry you missed them, and you want to stay upbeat and positive. You want to praise your donor for their past generosity and support of your mission, and generally take on the point of view that they'll want to give again if they're able. You can begin by telling the donor you know they intend to give because you know how much they care, assuming your tone and language that your donor may simply have forgotten or has just not gotten around to it due to the busyness of daily life. From our experience, this is often true. Most folks think they've already given and just need a reminder. Or a lot of our donors, their mindset is on calendar year. So if your fiscal year doesn't coincide in their calendar year, they might not you might not be top of mind yet. So, and most donors, again, will appreciate that reminder of how they've helped in the past. Another thing you can also do, of course, is send your pledge reminders. You can call or send a letter or an email. Of course, in order to do this, you'll want to run reports into your database of, do you have any overdue pledges? Do you have any upcoming payments? Maybe take a look at, are there payments that are due next month or next quarter? Again, based on your appetite and based on the time frame that you're looking at. You can use merge fields in a data table to include a summary of payments and remaining balance as well. So let's jump into the database real quick and take a look at that. We have 2 pledge reminder reports here, or we have 2 pledge report templates. One is pledge reminders and one is pledge details. So pledge reminders, these are specifically constituents who have pledges that have a payment due next month. So next month is going to, of course, that's a dynamic filter, so that depends when you run your report, but it's automatically going to pull in anyone with a payment due next month versus pledge details. This is going to show you any outstanding pledges that have pledge payments to date. So it's going to show you anything that any pledge that is still open. So any pledge that still has a balance on it. So if we take a look at our pledge reminders, for example, It's looking for type as pledge with a next installment date is next month. So it's going to look at the payment schedule on your pledge. And if the next installment date is next month, that's going to pull in anyone that's in this report. You can see here I have Aaron Burr. You can expand that if you'd like. For example, next quarter. Again, depending on what your strategy is and how far ahead you want to get, you can always adjust your filters. So let's say for this one, let's stick to next month. You can save this report. And again, what I like doing with this is the next time I run this report, if I run this report next month, the list is going to change because next month is going to be different. So I can add as much detail of the letters, of the columns and the filters here as I want. The other report template we wanted to take a look at is just anyone that has an open pledge with a pledge payment to date. This is a little bit different because it's looking at pledges that are open. That means it's whether or not it's in good standing or it's in arrears. Arrears means they may have missed a payment or two or more. But it also takes a look at both the pledges and the pledge payments. So you can compare, for example, your pledge amount, in this case 240, and the revenue amount, which counts the payments that have come in, and take a look at what the pledge balance is. So again, you can customize this, for example, to, hey, if anyone has a pledges of X amount and up, and they have a status of in arrears, maybe they've missed a payment, maybe that warrants a phone call. If it's in good standing and they haven't missed any payments, maybe that's an email. Again, depending on your strategy. Or maybe that's a phone call to say thank you. So this will compare your pledges and the actual payments that have come in toward that pledge. So again, you can customize this. You can take a look at specific date range, save this report, and reference that in a letter. So we're actually going to go into our letter now. I have a pledge reminder here that I've already pre-made. And I wanted to show you the different merge fields that you may consider using when sending out your pledge reminder letters. So you can see here I've added, we wanted to thank you for your pledge of pledge amount that you made on pledge date. Your next installment amount is due on next installment date. I have a data table here where I would like to itemize the pledge and the payments that have come in. So you can, for example, say below is a summary of your pledge and payments. If you want to customize the data table, you can click on this icon here. So I've added columns for date and amount. If you have additional information, for example, you may have been adding notes in the comment section or comments in the notes section, you can add that here. I do want to point out that, let's say we add note, and that's the pledge note. That is going to appear as the column header in the table. So you want to make sure that whatever you're adding does make sense to the donor and doesn't require additional explanation. So we'll take that out for now and cancel. You can even add fields, for example, like total amount paid is, your balance is. And to show you how we added that, I'm going to go ahead and take that out and re-add that. So you want insert boomerang field. Now I had these fields in here already because I know what fields are available. If you're not sure, I recommend just browsing. So first you'll see the constituent fields here. And as you scroll down, you're going to get to your transaction fields, and there's even a section here for your pledges. So if this is specifically your pledge reminders, you can scroll down to this section and see what fields are available to you. So if it says pledge amount, it's going to be the amount of the original pledge versus something, for example, that just says amount. That's going to total the amount of transactions that meets the filters, whereas the pledge amount, it's tied to that specific pledge. You have your pledge amount paid, for example, pledge date, first installment date, frequency. You have all these fields that you can add in if you need to. So in this case, we were looking for pledge balance. So you just add that there, and you can add as many fields as you need. In terms of filtering your letter, this is already filtering for, I showed you the report earlier where I had a report for pledges due next month. And what I'm doing here is because I've already created that report, I can just reference that report in this letter. So every month, whenever I run my pledge reminder letters, this will update based on if there is anyone who has a payment due next month. So I don't need to adjust my filters again. It's already going to adjust based on what month I'm running it from. And once you've kind of templated what you want your letter to look like, all you need to do is maybe you run your pledge reminder letters on the first of every month, just save and preview. And if there aren't any that have payments due next month, it's going to show you 0, which means I don't necessarily need to run this letter today. Also, if there's any problems with your letter, it will show you here if you have any skipped recipients. This is you can adjust in the letter details if you want this to generate for skipped recipients or not. I like doing that so I can see if there are any problems. In this case, for example, for Aaron Burr, maybe I can talk to someone and get an address for him, or maybe have an email address for him and send it via email instead. So we're going to cancel out of that for now. And that's your pledge reminder letters. Another thing we recommend doing that is often overlooked is really, ask your donors what is on their mind. Surveying donors regularly is a key component to interpreting and improving your donor retention rates. So within Bloomerang, we have 3 types of donor engagement surveys. We have new donor survey, existing donor survey, and lapsed donor survey. The new donor survey takes a look at your trust, commitment, and satisfaction, and asks donors questions that measures how much they trust your organization, how satisfied are they, and how committed are they to your organization. Once you turn this on, this automatically goes out whenever someone makes a first-time donation to your organization. So it's going to be first-time new donor or first-time donor moving forward from when you turn it on. Existing donor surveys add that extra layer of intimacy. So it measures trust, commitment, satisfaction, and intimacy with your organization. So our new donor survey has 10 questions. Our existing donor survey has 15. Our lapsed donor survey only has 1 question, which is, why did you stop giving? And this automatically goes out to donors that have lapsed or haven't given for over 12 months. So either way, if a donor, even if a donor has lapsed, you still want to know why they stopped giving, and perhaps that will help you re-engage them and get them giving to your organization, supporting your organization again. If you're interested in turning this on, I've linked our donor engagement survey basics here. Everyone's going to receive a link to the slides, so you will get links to these as well. Once your survey results start coming in, your survey dashboard is it's going to start to look something like this. So it's going to give you a score up to 7 of how your donors feel about you. And for top lapsed responses, it's also going to list the responses that donors are saying why they stopped giving to your organization. If this is something that you'd like to turn on, you're going to head over to your email section. And then there's your engagement surveys. I've already turned mine on, so it looks like this. But for you, if you haven't turned it on yet, you can click on each and activate any combination of the surveys that you'd like. And we have a great question here. Are you able to edit the surveys or add additional questions? At this point, you're unable to edit the surveys because the surveys are based on Dr. Adrian Sargent's research. But we also like to think of the survey as a starting point to the conversation, right? Especially if the donors or constituents are responding to your surveys, that's a form of engagement with your organization. So it might be a good idea to send a follow-up for your additional questions. Thank you for that question. All right. And of course, at the end or at the start of your fiscal year, you want to review your major giving. If you pulled folks from your normal cycle of appeals because they were special enough, I use special in air quotes there, if they were special enough to warrant a personalized approach, make sure you haven't neglected to ask them at all. These all-important donors can often slip through the cracks. So check with your solicitors who were given prospect assignments to confirm that solicitations were made. If not, give these donors a phone call right away. So even if you run on a different fiscal year, the summer is still a great time to take stock of where you are with the folks in your major donor portfolio. So even if you're not preparing for an ask right now, get a status on your major donors. How close are they to being ready for an ask? What type of moves do you need to make to get them there? You want to start preparing for that. We have some resources here for you. We have 2 classes dedicated to major gifts, which I've linked here as well. Another thing that we want to consider, or we'd like for you to consider, is send Uran reports. Every donor should get something, even if it's just a brief email with maybe a photo of someone they helped and a quick, "You're a hero," or "You did it. Thank you for helping us," or "Thank you for helping and tell a story." And remind donors how they've helped. And again, say thank you. I like to think of how your annual report fits in your donor cultivation strategy. We have a separate class on this coming up, so I've linked it here as well if you'd like to register for that. But think of how your annual report can fit into your cultivation strategy. Don't think of this as just a list, but how does it fit into your overall strategy? I mean, if you have the budget for it, or if there's a precedent in your organization, you might even think of sending a special gift to donors or volunteers who really helped you out a lot during the year. And it doesn't have to be, and when I say a gift, it doesn't have to be a big thing. And, it's just a little token of appreciation that lets them know that you're thinking about them and you appreciate them. Maybe, it can be as small as a sticker or a stick of gum, whatever kind of fits with your organization and your mission. That could be a fun little reminder and a fun little thank you for your supporters. And again, there's nothing wrong with making the interaction fun, and it's not a give me money type of communication. It's not an ask. As a result, your donor will likely see you in a more favorable light when it does come time for your next solicitation. Of course, don't forget about your recurring donors. It may have been a while since your monthly donors got a real thank you, so maybe consider a thankathon this month. Recruit board members and volunteers, your different committee members to help. So this isn't necessarily the time to ask for an upgrade. Consider just saying a pure thank you, especially if you haven't been in touch for a while. Now, a lot of folks, especially if you're recruiting help, might not be used to this. So make it easy for them to do this for you. So maybe build a script for them that they can reference, or prepare some talking points for them. When you build those reports, you'll have more opportunities to add in those personal details in the phone call as well. We have a recorded class on this, Loving Your Recurring Donors, with our recurring giving queen, Erica Wastorp. She literally wrote books on recurring giving. So we recommend checking that out. Also, again, this being just a pure thank you, not necessarily asking for more, not necessarily asking for an upgrade. It's an excellent way to set the stage later on if you're thinking about an ask within the next month or the next couple of months. When you give people something, even if it's just a warm, heartfelt thank you, they feel inclined to reciprocate. So again, it's all about that relationship building. And lastly, I wanted to talk about some quick cleanup tips. Oops, jump too far ahead there. So first, begin to plan to clean up your database so you're ready for your fiscal year end and your calendar year end, I should say, fundraising. So we recommend purging any donors who may not have given for a couple of years, or prospects who haven't given for a couple of years. So first, actually before that, clean up your funds, campaigns, and appeals. Are there funds, campaigns, and appeal codes that you're not using anymore that you maybe need to deactivate and clean that up, or consolidate, making sure that your gifts have the right funds, campaigns, appeals. If they don't, you can use the mass update tool for that. And second, identify your number and your thresholds. Again, for example, donors who haven't given in X number of years, or prospects who haven't given in X number of years. There is no magic number for how many years that is. For example, Claire Axelrod recommends 5 years for donors who haven't given in 5 years, or prospects who haven't given in 3 years. That really depends on your organization, what your bandwidth is, and what your appetite is to engage with those donors and to engage with those prospects. If you're a one-person shop, your threshold might be a little bit smaller, versus if you have a team of staff or volunteers to help you, then you might be able to set a bigger threshold, or you might be able to prioritize. But if they're still in your database, if you're still trying to re-engage them, it still takes up space in your database. It takes up mental bandwidth. So think about that when you're thinking of your thresholds as well. Another thing that you can do for a quick cleanup is you can turn on free nightly NCOA processing within your database. 17% of the adult US population moves every year. So not only will NCOA find movers for you, it will also fix addresses such as adding street, avenue, road, etc. if those are missing, or standardize it or change it if it's incorrect. It also comes with deceased suppression. So if our NCOA processing finds a first name, last name plus address match for a deceased constituent, it will add a tag to that donor that says they are deceased, so that you can remove them from your mailings. This is free if you have a standard database in Bloomerang, or if you have Grow plus True Givers. All you need to do is turn it on. So if you haven't already done so and you're an admin in your database, you can go to Settings, My Organization, and scroll down to the NCOA section. If you've already turned it on, it should say View NCOA Dashboard. If you haven't, it's going to say Activate NCOA Processing. if you don't see it or don't have the option for it, let us know in the chat. And if you're interested, we'll have someone from our customer success team reach out so you can get that activated for your database. Again, if you're on a standard Bloomerang database or Grow plus True Givers, this is already built in and it's free. You just need to turn it on. Once you turn that on, I'll show you a sample here of what that might look like. So if you look at the profile and we look at an address, if an NCOA update is made, you're going to have an NCOA note on the address. Some reasons that you might see here are it could have been there could have been a move that was detected, in which case the new address was added. The old address is still there, it's just moved to non-primary. The update never deletes data from your database. So reasons you might see here are for the NCOA update are moved or standardized or non-mailable. Non-mailable means if for some reason the post office has found that this address is non-mailable and they haven't found a new address for it, it's going to mark it as non-mailable. Now, if the constituent is deceased, it's going to add a deceased tag to their constituent profile. You can report on all of this information as well. So if you have this turned on, let's see if I have it in my database. Yes. So you can see NCOA updates here, which I'm filtering for constituents who have a note on their address that says NCOA. So it will add the primary note here. You can even narrow this down further. For example, note contains moved, note contains non-mailable, note contains standardized. So you can see what changes are being made in your database and you can act accordingly. For example, run a report for customers or for constituents in your database that have non-mailable addresses. Do you have an alternative way of reaching those constituents? If not, you may want to consider, asking volunteers or other staff who might know, or otherwise engaging with the donor to get updated information. Now, it is important to note that this is an NCOA update. It's not an address finder. So it can update the addresses that are in your database. It cannot add an address if it's not already existing. Another quick cleanup tip that you can do is identify potential foundation and business funders. Most of the tips that we've talked about apply to individual donors. This makes sense. This is where about 80% of donor dollars come from based on Giving USA. But too often institutional donor research gets put on the back burner. That's a mistake because you may be missing out on some potentially significant grants. New fiscal years are about to begin or has just begun for many of them as well. So get those lists in order so you can get your proposals delivered in a timely manner in the coming year. And since securing this type of funding is often a matter of who you know, don't forget to run your list by your board members, committees, major donors, certain major donors, loyal volunteers, and staff to see if anyone has connections with any of these prospects. An easy way to do this within your databases again is run a report of organization constituents in your database. Identify what those possible relationships and connections are, and include those relationships, those relationships, track those relationships in Bloomerang, and you can report on them too. You can run reports like, for example, show me all organizations that have a relationship with this specific board member or any board member. And again, whether it's your fiscal year end or not, this is a great time to get a head start on planning for your calendar year end or both. And we hope these tips will help you not leave money on the table this year or the coming years. I wanted to show you as well, we have some upcoming classes. So we have some classes already linked in these slides, so you'll have access to those. But these are upcoming classes in the next week or so. We have donor cultivation and annual reports. We'll take a look at how you can incorporate your annual reports into your overall strategy. Also, clean up your data to improve your fundraising. So again, if you're in the summertime, and this is a good time to be cleaning up your database, we'll take a look at more tips on that. And of course, we have resources here. We have links to some articles here, and the find phone numbers, fastpeoplesearch.com, was actually submitted or suggested by a customer of ours. It's a great place to find phone numbers for your constituents if you don't have them. We have a question here, deleting or deactivated those lagged donors, which is better? That's a great question. And for those of you who want to weigh in the chat, please do so. That really, there's a couple of considerations there. First, in terms of your database size, inactive constituents still do count toward your license limit. So if you want to keep them in your database, that's one thing to consider. Or if you're maybe getting close to your limit, do you want to have that space in your database be taken up by an inactive constituent or an active donor? A second thing to take a look at there is, what is your bandwidth and your appetite to re-engage those inactive donors? And again, this might change based on the numbers. If you have 50 inactive donors, for example, can you be reaching out to those donors to reactivate them versus if you have 1,000 inactive donors, what's your appetite to re-engage them, and what is the likelihood that you will be able to re-engage them? You can always, this is a bit controversial when talking about should you remove someone from your donor database or not. You can always archive it, right? So if there are some constituents that you're considering removing from your donors, maybe keep their information in an Excel file. I kind of think of it from the point of view of, if they're in my database, there's still some, I'm still thinking about potentially re-engaging them, and there's still a potential that they may be re-engaged. And again, that potential of re-engaging them, that depends on your organization. But if there's a possibility that they may be re-engaged and I have the bandwidth to re-engage them and we have a plan in place to re-engage them, I still prefer keeping them in the database. So you can still track those activities. So you can still track those touch points and your engagement efforts, and you can see what they're responding to. For example, if you send emails outside of Bloomerang, they may be opening the emails. Maybe they haven't given again yet, but the fact that they're opening your emails, that still shows possibility of re-engagement. So if they're in my database, they can still, I can still track those things, versus if they're not, even if I am re-engaging with them outside, I'm losing that tracking within the database. We have some customers also, for example, who keep their contacts in MailChimp. So contacts being they haven't given yet, but they do sign up for the email newsletters, for example. They keep those in MailChimp, and they keep their donors, strictly donors, in their donor database. So you can approach it many different ways. Thank you for that question. We have another question here. What do you say to a major donor that has fallen through the cracks when you call them? Great question. I would go back, instead of taking a look at what do I say to them, kind of take a look at their history of, when was the last time they gave? What have been our touch points with the major donor? And was there maybe a lapse in our communication that has caused them to fall through the cracks? who in our organization do they have the best relationship with that maybe can provide better insight, or maybe is the best person to have that conversation. And maybe don't be afraid to ask, you know, again, don't come from the point of view that they are choosing to stop giving. Maybe they have already, maybe they maybe it got overlooked from their end as well. And don't be afraid to ask them, like, what can we do to re-engage you with the organization? Or is there anything that happened that caused this change in your giving? So don't be afraid to ask them. It's a good starting point for that conversation. Wonderful. And that's about all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me talking about practical tips for your fiscal year end. As a reminder, everyone's going to receive a link to the slides, and all of the resources that we showed you today are linked in the slides as well. So that will be, or I hope that is a good reference for you. Thank you again so much. And we hope to see you in another Academy class soon. Have a great rest of your day. Bye.